Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming today. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, David Blair. David is the president of Blair Group, LLC, and the executive director of the Conservative Leadership PAC. As a youth organizer himself, David led the youth efforts in 2016, working out of the Trump Tower as the National Director of Youth for Trump. He went on to oversee the youth outreach for the President Transition Team. As an advocate for free speech in college campuses, David has been involved in the promotion and execution of President Trump's executive order for free speech. David has been a speaker at CPAC, Japanese CPAC, and the Western Conservative Summit, Turning Point USA Teen and Student Action Summits. David identifies talented principled conservatives to deploy youth coordinators in hotly contested races all over the country. David has trained over 5,000 conservative young people in the principles of mass-based youth organizing. I'm going to turn it over to David now. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, and then I'll come back on and tell you a little bit about relational organizing and how relational is an important strategy for reaching youth voters today. And that's actually how we met, David and I did, on the Georgia runoff a few years ago. David, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to have you on and I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Turn it over.
Now, the biggest thing I would like to accomplish here is kind of to demystify what it means to do youth organizing specifically and reach out to young people as conservatives. This is something that I'm just going to be completely blunt. For the most part, conservatives have certainly struggled with. We saw, and in last night, I do not have any numbers from last night. I'm not sure what the youth vote did last night. We'll have to, that'll be maybe for a future call whenever we have more numbers in, because some votes are still even being tallied at the moment. But I can tell you in 2021, when Youngkin ran in Virginia, our PAC, the Conservative Leadership PAC, put 8 youth coordinators on that race. They were trained specifically on how to do mass-based youth organizing. If any of you are familiar with Morton Blackwell and the Leadership Institute, they're the ones who trained them. And these individuals went out and organized and identified thousands of students that were supportive of Glenn Youngkin. And we turned out thousands of students to vote for Glenn Youngkin. It wasn't a magic bullet message. It wasn't, a bunch of free giveaways and gimmies. It wasn't, there is no kind of magic wand to wave that will win you the youth vote, or that will make you perform well in the youth vote. With Youngkin in 2021, we swung the youth vote from the 2020 election, where Donald Trump lost by 18 to 24-year-old vote by 33%, whenever you add in third-party candidates, to losing it by only 5% with Glenn Youngkin. Just to be totally frank, that really boils down to just putting in the legwork on college campuses. Young people, voting age young people, are a pretty unique population in that we know where they are physically, most likely, where large chunks of them are. So college campuses, community colleges, universities, even high schools, everybody has high schools in their districts. All these places are huge untapped resources for the right, where we should be organizing. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Dave, if we walk into a college campus, they're likely to throw rocks at us. And it may seem that way because there is a very vocal liberal minority on college campuses. But the vast majority of college students especially don't necessarily strongly identify with one party or the other. Most of the time, they're apathetic. If you just walk onto a college campus and ask, any passing student what they think about their local state senator, they don't even know they have one. And so it is not a stretch there to say that if they're approached appropriately, with a good message using the appropriate tactics, that they can be persuaded to support a conservative candidate. Typically, if you ask a college student, which party do you support, they'll say neither. They like to think of themselves as, independents or what have you, but they don't really have strong party affiliations, and can be persuaded to support a candidate if they are appropriately asked. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the functionality of how do we go about doing that? How do we go about asking students to support our candidates? And it's very similar in tactic to how you would ask anybody else to support your candidates. Now, you have to understand that we're with a student population, 18 to 24-year-olds, we're going to be operating using almost no data. Most of them have not voted. Most of them are not registered to vote where they're going to school. And most likely, if left to their own devices, would not vote. You can sometimes get some consumer data, and I can tell you I've worked with all the data firms out there. When we try to pull data for college students, high school students, you can't really even get data for high school students, but for college students, you're kind of throwing a best guess at where they live. They're such a transient population. They're constantly moving semester to semester. A third of them graduate every single semester. So your data is always going to be incomplete there. The best way to do it, and Lisa, I'm sure, is going to be talking about this in a little bit, is to build relationships with students at the grassroots level. It's very, very, very hard to do a grass tops kind of AstroTurf operation with college students. And there's really two reasons for that. One, college students, young people in general, have a very big BS meter. And I'm just going to say BS. They can smell something that is inauthentic a mile away. They are motivated by authentic messages only. So if your candidate is trying to, politic them, or your message is trying to, you don't really believe it, they smell that immediately. Now, we see this play out day to day. A lot of young people, if you ask them, what do you think of socialism? They have a positive view of socialism. And then ask them to define socialism, they probably can't do that accurately, right? But it is, these authentic messengers like Bernie Sanders, for example, he authentically believes, what he says about socialism and communism. He believes that stuff, right? And so he's able to attract young people. The same thing was true with Ron Paul, right? He was a very authentic messenger. Donald Trump is an extremely authentic messenger. That can be attracting to some, depending on the message, and is attracting to some young people. But authenticity has to be the base of your message when you're reaching out to young people. Second, in your message, they're motivated by fairness. Typically, you see that kind of by the left messaged as justice, right? We've all heard, throw justice into any phrase. The left is typically using that. What they're really talking about there is fairness. There's a great book out there by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind that really delves into kind of the way that people make decisions. And in particular, you can talk about how young people make decisions, and every decision that we make, about a message, about a candidate, about a cause, all of that comes from not just our head and our reasoning and rational mind, but also from our heart, right? From our emotional brain. Young people typically have much more of an emotional brain than they do a rational brain. Literally, if you look at like medical science, your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25. So 25, 26. So you have to come to them with a message that addresses injustice, show them why something is not fair, not just, and as conservatives, guys, we have a lot of stuff we can point to there, but we don't typically phrase it in that way, right? We have to look at all of our messages and say, one, how do we authentically communicate this? What tools and mechanisms and operations should we use to authentically message? Your candidate should be able to go off script. You should be able to go off script. You should be able to have a mastery of your issues to the point where you can just kind of riff on them. Prepared written remarks, all that stuff, it does not connect well. Second, how do we frame all of our messages, no matter what they are? It doesn't necessarily matter the issue. It matters, are you framing it in such a way that it is fighting an injustice? I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of actual on-the-ground grassroots youth organizing and how you guys can do some of that. So, for example, the Second Amendment, right? If you walked out onto a college campus or to most young people, and you said, "Hey, what do you think about the Second Amendment?" They'd say, "Oh, well, I love free speech," or they are not particularly well versed in the Second Amendment, why we have it, anything like that. Many of them are not gun owners. They may not really relate there. If you even come out and say, "Hey, what do you think about your constitutional right to defend yourself?" Again, it's kind of going over their heads. What I've found is you walk up to a college student on a college campus, say that you're working for a very pro-gun candidate, and you're recruiting volunteers. Start off by saying something like, "Hey, do you think that young women on this campus should be able to defend themselves against violent assault?" They always say yes. And now the door's been opened where you are positioning yourself as, I'm fighting the injustice of young women being assaulted on this campus, right? I am interested in equaling the playing field and having righting a wrong. And that will get you much farther in the conversation at the very least. They may not agree with you still, but it'll get you farther in the conversation. They don't respond well to what I would call kind of branded phrases. So if something has been, like the word Republican or the word Democrat, it typically turns them off. Conservative and liberal, even that turns them off a little bit. They don't really like labels that much. Socialism, unfortunately, because their professors likely are socialists, has a positive connotation, but government control has a negative connotation. And try to wrap your head around that. So it's really important that every time you reach out to young people and you have any kind of a message delivered, that you understand that words really do matter with that population, especially today's Generation Z has a very, very quick intuition, also known as a short attention span. That quick intuition, they will make a decision whether they support or oppose you very, very quickly. If you're using branded language, you're using the wrong frame for your issue, and just right off the bat, inauthentically communicating, saying things maybe that are scripted or you don't necessarily believe in or mean, they tune out immediately, and it's really, really hard to get them back. So that's really first and foremost, whenever you're crafting a message to give to young people to motivate them to support you, remember those things. I recommend, shameless plug, recommend taking Leadership Institute courses around messaging, message development. There's something called a Leesburg grid that I highly recommend you all take a look at. If you cannot get to an LI class, they have the Leesburg grid lecture on YouTube. A gentleman by the name of Steve Sutton gives it, and would recommend looking at that when it comes to message development. And then also, like Klaus has posted in the chat, really recommend looking at The Righteous Mind. It's a great book as far as motivation goes. Okay, so I'll pause just really quickly because the second part of what I want to talk about is way more nuts and bolts mechanics of how do you deliver that message and how do you organize young people. Does anybody have any questions about messaging to young people, like how you craft that message or anything like that? I'll just pause quickly for a couple of questions.
Yeah, if you want to put your questions in the chat, we can, I think David can see them as well. Otherwise, we can direct.
Gina, it's
yeah.
just leadershipinstitute.org, and they have all their classes are listed on there.
Well, I'll link into the Leadership Institute. Oh, somebody else did. Okay, great.
Yeah, they have a lot.
Even maybe you can explain just what is the relationship between the Conservative Leadership PAC and the Leadership Institute, because I think I even messed it up.
Good. I should probably mention that. So the Conservative Leadership PAC, we are a political action committee. We have a PAC and a super PAC, so obviously we're completely partisan. That's what we do. We share in common a chairman with Leadership Institute. Morton Blackwell is chairman of Conservative Leadership PAC. He's also president of Leadership Institute. So obviously we very highly value Leadership Institute training and students that are trained there. I'm also a guest faculty member for Leadership Institute. Leadership Institute, for anyone from our IRS overlords listening in, is a nonprofit. They are not partisan at all. Their trainings are open to the public. They do not support candidates or legislation. So they're a purely educational foundation. Tasha, so the specific class at Leadership Institute, just really any of them that revolve around messaging.
I think I was referring to the messaging one, Lieberg.
All right, Gina, I see your question. How can we recruit conservative young people to volunteer for a campaign, not convert a liberal young person into a conservative? So I'm getting to that kind of my second part, so that might be a good segue there to talk about it as far as just getting the already conservative kids. But I'll cover that kind of in my next section here. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself.
No, I was going to try to put in the chat the name of that particular course on messaging. I think you said it was
Leesburg Grid. The
Leesburg Grid. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super effective tool of developing your message.
Interesting.
A thematic message.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. I'll look it up.
Oh, you should. It'd be great. You would love it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
Any other questions before David gets started again?
All right.
Okay, you're good.
So I'll, Gina, it's a great segue. Your question. I'll go ahead and address that. So Gina, and for everybody else's knowledge, a great place to start on every college campus, and this is really true with any coalition, any community that you're going to reach out to. You have to kind of collect your low-hanging fruit, right? Find your allies and your adversaries that are already operating within the community. There is no reason to try and reinvent the wheel every single time you do this. However, depending on where you are operating, there may be greater levels of existing assets on one campus in one area or another. For example, if I was organizing at the University of California, Berkeley, I would know that I've got a pretty large group of adversaries on that campus, right? But also, a little counterintuitively here, there's also a pretty vibrant libertarian and conservative movement at Cal Berkeley as well. In response largely to the insanity that they have to deal with every day. So you have, and you will have some conservative students, libertarian students, potential allies on campus, pretty much anywhere you look. So don't fall into the trap of thinking all young people are just a bunch of liberals and there's no point in trying to reach out to them or organize them. Now, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, that most young people are apathetic, that also can include conservative students on campus. I mean, I'm I don't know if you remember when you all were in college, but whenever I was in college, I was definitely more interested on, where the cheap beer was versus going to register to vote. And you are competing for their time, a young person's time, with their friends, their social life, their friends, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, sports, academics, video games, anything else. You're competing with that for their time. So you have to understand that they need to be properly incentivized to give you that time. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to go around and start paying every single college student. Obviously, money is a motivator, but that's not feasible for every college student that will volunteer for you. So you have to figure out what are the non-tangible, things, or sometimes it's even tangible, right? Sometimes it's a hat and a shirt, right? But what is it that I can use? Maybe my time, my candidate's time, special recognition. Every intern or volunteer you have, they should not be called intern or volunteer, right? They should be a voter contact specialist. They should be a campaign fellow. Give them a title and get them involved, right? Titles are free. There's no point in being stingy with them, right? And a lot of young people, especially college and a lot of high school students, they need those titles to put on their resumes and get letters of recommendation, to get future jobs, to build their careers, and they can get pretty motivated to help you out, in order to get those. Another thing that is very useful with young people is peer pressure. It can be a good thing. I have 2 kids of my own now, and so I think I'm officially an old man. But the kids these days, right? If you look around and you think, why the hell are they wearing this or singing this or doing that? Okay, it's because somebody somewhere said it was cool, and then it became the cool thing to do. Think back to whenever you were younger, there was likely something where you're like, why the hell did I do that? Well, it was because it was the cool thing to do, right? If you can make, your internship, your candidate, your message, whatever, the cool thing, and we might think like, oh, that'll never happen. Conservative messages don't appeal that way. I would say you should look at all the young people following people like Jordan Peterson, the young people that are following folks like Joe Rogan. He's not explicitly a conservative, but he's pretty close, right? Look at the people that young folks, Gen Z especially, the conservative voices that they follow, especially on social media, and you'll see that you have a lot of authentic messengers, and you have folks that are presenting their messages, you kind of in that unique way, right? So you need to try to emulate that as much as you can authentically. Now, as far as the nuts and bolts of spreading this message go and reaching out to young people, you have to show up. That's just plain and simple. You've got to go where they are physically. This cannot be done through phone calls, emails, even text messages. Good text messages, like the ones that Lisa does, they help a lot, especially the relational messages. But you have to pair that with grassroots activism and building the communities on each campus. So I highly recommend putting a youth coordinator, specifically a youth coordinator, onto campuses, their entire job being to recruit students who are interested in being a part of your organization. The first place to look would be, as Gina said here, with the existing conservative organizations, right? Those are the partisan student groups like College Republicans, single issue groups like, Students for Life, Students for Concealed Carry, would be tax groups, things like that. General conservative organizations, Turning Point USA, YAL, YAF, all those places. I recommend just reaching out to them and saying, hey, can I come speak at your next meeting? Can our candidate come speak at your next meeting? We'd love to recruit volunteers. And you just have to reach out to them, and you have to do that work. You have to do a lot of it, right? You have to do a lot of meetings, buy a lot of coffee, sit down and talk with a lot of people, and you should always come to them with a specific ask and also like a specific way to take action. So what that typically looks like is, hey, we have an internship we're promoting. We would love it if you and your club members would become interns of ours. All right, or help us form our students for Blair chapter here at your university. So you have to have some sort of organizational structure that they feel a part of. And it also just helps keep them organized. They're used to doing that. So you have to have some sort of organizational structure to plug them into once they've been recruited. And most often that's a face-to-face conversation. Gina, good question. Yeah, you should absolutely put it on jobs boards. You should, if you have an internship, put that on a jobs board. Go to college career offices. You can a lot of times have them promote that on your college career offices. You can go to like-minded organizations. I mean, why not go to the local party? Why not go to, cast the widest net that you can. You can even try to find conservative professors that will promote this. There's a lot of opportunity as well with high schools. Sometimes you can get, depending on how you promote your internship, you can get high schools to give volunteer hours for that. And like in Virginia, for example, high school students have to do a certain number of volunteer hours. And if you make it easy for them, then they might do it with you. All right. So my favorite way of recruiting my kind of initial volunteers is to literally just do the old school clipboard and a table. Face-to-face communication is the most authentic type of communication. It's what I call high impact, low volume communication, because you can't do a ton of it, right? Like, you're not going to face-to-face meet with every single student at a 50,000 student university. But the students that you do meet with, and you do table and you do clipboard and you do have coffee with or whatever, that's going to be a much more impactful conversation, at least to get your initial volunteers. Then once you've got your initial volunteers, you have to canvass the campus. We've all done door knocking. We all know what canvassing is. You have to apply that same technique now to the college campus. That includes dormitories, student apartments, student housing, and it's a 100% canvas. It's an ID canvas. So you go literally door to door. You don't really know who's behind that door. I have no clue who lives in that apartment, most likely. I don't know who lives in that dormitory for sure, right? But you're going to go door to door and try to identify who they're likely to support. Most of them don't know who your candidate is. So great. You get to talk to them about your candidate. And tell them how great your candidate is and how terrible the other guy is, right? And they're probably going to go off their first impression, but then you can get them registered to vote. In most states, you can get them registered to vote right there. Record that they are a supporter and they're registered to vote. And finally, you can turn them out to vote, depending on the state you live in. Sometimes you can go get their ballot, turn it in for them, depending on your state. Sometimes, it's more of I have to badger you and go knock on your door and call you and text you and email you 15 times to then get you to go do it. But it's the same systematic effort that you use in the general community, but you just have to apply that to a college campus. It is labor intensive. It's difficult. You have to have a lot of volunteers to do it. You are not going to be able to rely on accurate data for that 9 times out of 10, because it just doesn't exist anywhere. The school doesn't even really have it. So you have to go and build that list yourself. That will create your essentially your voter universe, and then you've got to turn them out. And you do the exact same GOTV operation that you do on any other voter to try to turn those folks out. So, and I think we're about into the Q&A period here, but to just recap, to first craft a message that is authentic and focuses on fairness, and then deliver that message in person with authentic messengers, hopefully members of their community, right? Other college students, other young people. Do the legwork, meet with as many conservative student groups, allied student groups as you can. That's your initial wave of volunteers. Then run tables, clipboards, anything you can to identify like-minded students. Invite them to, after the first week, we call it a campus kickoff meeting. Have that campus kickoff meeting, then set out to do your mass campus canvas. That will then give you your voter universe.
I think Carrie has a question there.
Yeah, Carrie. Carrie's question is, any tips on gaining records or lists of conservative professors and teachers? It's a total crapshoot. They're most often hiding in STEM fields. Check the engineering department. If anything sounds particular, like an ag teacher, sometimes if conservative groups have faculty sponsors, sometimes they're all right. Very seldom is there going to be like an outspoken conservative professor. They're kind of hard to find. Look in STEM fields, engineering. If like there's a rodeo club on campus, there's stuff that just seems conservative, but you've really got to explore that. There's no one place to find it. I can tell you how to find liberal professors. Walk out on campus with a Trump hat and they can find you.
David, I have a question.
Yes.
That I am always interested in is, how do we reach the younger people? Because I think the Democrats are doing that really well. They're going into the schools, the high schools, people that aren't even of voting age. Do you recommend that? Do you think that's a worthwhile effort to go people that aren't 18 that can vote?
Yeah, certainly. 100%. High school students. And whenever I say young people, I'm including high school age students for sure. High schools, homeschools, by the way, something that's often overlooked. Homeschool associations and homeschool organizations are wonderful assets for you. I'll plug Generation Joshua. If you don't know who they are, you should Google Generation Joshua. They oftentimes do deployments. I mean, they'll send kids all over the country to help with campaign deployments. They're great. But yes, high schools, 100%. Every single district is going to have a high school population in it. Doesn't matter how small the district is, they're going to have at least one high school. Those kids, for the most part, they're just in it for the social interaction. There's not as many of them that, even though the left would like you to believe this, there's not many of them that are like hardcore social activists. So if a couple of the cool kids decide to go start interning for the campaign, then they all start to show up. And I mean, they're great because they have a ton of enthusiasm. They aren't like that jaded campaign. This is my 5th campaign and I'm a college sophomore and have finals next week. Don't carrying around a cup of coffee and hissing at people. Like they're basically kind of a fresh slate. And on top of that, studies show consistently that the way you vote, the first time you vote, you are most likely to continue voting that way, unless something happens. Now, as Republicans, we always used to hope and kind of cross our fingers and say, oh, well, they'll become a Republican whenever they start paying taxes, buy a house, and start a family. The problem is the Generation Z is not, they are not, they don't really pay, they do pay taxes, but far more likely to take in taxes than they are to pay taxes. But they aren't getting traditional jobs. They are definitely not buying homes, and they're not getting married. And they're also not having children if they can avoid it. So it is some of the traditional things that would conservify somebody along their life journey, not necessarily happening for this generation. So we have to, if we can, start very early messaging to them. And with high schools, it's a whole different ball of wax because the administration and the teachers control access quite a bit. You have to find maybe parents, students, a teacher, very seldom an administrator that will kind of let you in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any other questions for David?
And go to high school football games.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody else having any questions here. David, I got to thank you. This was wonderful. And I know, wait a minute, here's some, how does Turning Point reach other groups?
Actually, that's great. So functionally, every campus that I've ever run across, for the most part, sometimes it's buried in the middle in their website. They have what's called a registered student organization list. The registered student organization list, or RSO list. Typically, you're going to find that in like the student life tab, or sometimes just groups or events or something. But if you find that, the list of registered student organizations, sometimes they're outdated, sometimes they're a little junky, and sometimes universities won't give conservative groups RSO status. So search on social media, search on Google, elsewhere for the group's name at such and such place. So you can look on the individual group's website. But the RSO lists are a great way to research your allies, your adversaries, and your opportunities. They'll have your turning points, your YALs, your YAFs, or anybody there that's an obvious ally. They'll have your adversaries too, like, students who hate David Blair, or, whoever it happens to be. You'll see them, Students for Justice in Palestine, those sorts of folks. And then your opportunities as well: student newspapers, rodeo club, shooting team, monster truck appreciation team, whatever. Okay, there's certain things that you have an idea they might be conservative if they're into. So you can definitely check that out. I don't have the YouTube link handy for the Sutton speech, but if you just Google, or if you YouTube Steve Sutton Leesburg grid, I think it comes right out.
Rita has a question about, could you give us an assessment of what happened in Virginia? And how does that?
Not an educated one, because it's only been about, I'm only about 5 hours removed from it. So not a very educated one, unfortunately. Give me a couple of days. But I will say, and I haven't seen any numbers yet, so I'm not exactly sure. I will say that there were certainly turnout issues. One thing that I'm a very big proponent of, that I think we should absolutely engage in very aggressively over the next year plus, is a very aggressive messaging campaign, branding campaign to two different audiences. One, suburban Republicans, or Republicans who have left the party or gotten angry at the party due to tone, due to the way things are presented at a national level. So we have to localize to that audience, and we have to remind them why they were Republican in the first place, why they should support us in the first place. Kitchen table issues is what Youngkin ran on, right? It's, we're going to lower your taxes, make your schools safer, make your community safer. Why the heck do they care about us? We need to do that very aggressively in the, middle to upper class suburban neighborhoods. And then secondly, we need to be very, very aggressive at low propensity blue collar and Republican registration. The low propensity vote is always overlooked. I mean, oftentimes by campaigns for reasons of resources. It's all based around, we're going to put our money where we're getting the biggest ROI. And typically that's not going to be in like a big low propensity voter effort, right? But if we want to win, Democrats have put for a long time quite a bit of resources into low propensity registration, and then also low propensity, not just registration, but moving them along the process of voting. Sometimes, depending on the state, that's pure on ballot harvesting. And if it's legal in the state and the other side is doing it, guess what you have to do? You must build a program out for that. If it's legal in the state, I might not like that it's legal. I might want to change the law, but who gets to change the law? People who get elected. So we got to do that. So big push on low propensity registration, and then making sure they vote. And you have to put a lot of effort into that. I'll just say that nationally, that needs to be done, especially in swing states. Virginia, there was I would say, a very valiant effort by the party and also by the governor. Secure Your Vote Virginia did a fantastic job. A lot of their races won because they did that. They did a lot of that. There were, I think, probably a couple of areas. I mean, obviously with Juan Pablo Segura and with Bill Wolf, both great candidates, good campaigns. Might have just been going up against a bit of a blue tide that is pushing further and further out into Virginia from DC. So if we ever, well, I should say, when we get the White House and the Senate back, we should gut and defund the federal government. That would help. So.
Well, David, I really appreciate it. I'm just gonna take a couple of minutes and talk about Buzz 360 and relational, because I think it's critical when we start talking about how do we reach those people? You mentioned many of them, the youth vote, the minority voters, and I've just got a couple of slides for those of you who are not familiar with what we do. I'm just going to share my screen because we have a pretty large, at this point, platform for campaigns and organizations. So when you start looking at everything that we have, there's the whole digital platform. Something new we actually built before the Virginia race, and we had several customers using it in Virginia, was data-driven triggers to do ballot chase. It was quite successful. Like I said, we just put it out right before the election, so there's a lot of analyzing we're going to have to do after today to see how those candidates did. Then we have what I really want to talk about is relational outreach and relational organizing, and that's our Swipe Red app. Some of you are familiar with that, but those that aren't, it's all about reaching out to friends and peers and talking authentically, like David was talking, with people that they know. That is an award-winning back-to-back awards, actually, for best in field based on for Republican and Democrat apps. So we're very proud of that. But Swipe Red is really the whole strategy, and Dave was talking about this. The whole strategy is built about volunteers, and we call them advocates, reaching out to people that they know and having an authentic conversation about our causes. It's interesting because we believe that talking about a cause is better than talking about just about anything, particularly, in my opinion, when we start talking about youth vote, because they're very into causes. So I think that's really important. And even if it's as simple as a phone call or a text or even a friendly direct message chat or a community event, just a single conversation can make a big difference. So our Swipe Red app is, you can see these are the different components of it. There's what we call an admin, where your campaign or your organization is crafting the message. It goes out to the app, and the advocates are sharing that out to their network, friend to friend, peer to peer, social media, their social media networks. That's an extremely powerful tool to get a message out about a cause. Now, this is the slide I'm really wanting to show everybody, because these are studies that have been going on for a couple of years. Matter of fact, more than a couple of years. But this is the result of campaigns using relational organizing as a strategy. The average voter is 2 times more likely to get out to vote if they have been invited or asked to go vote or dragged along to vote by a friend. The low propensity voter, and some of you might know these people, they are here in Minnesota, they work for us, they were college Republicans, but those low propensity voters are 6 times more likely to get involved or get out to vote if they're asked by a friend or a family member. They don't trust institutions, they don't trust politicians, but they do trust their friends and family. The millennial voters are 7 times more likely to get out to vote if asked by a friend. And minority voters, and many times that's the only way they can be reached is through friend-to-friend relational conversations. And I put the slide up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but why is it good to invest in time and money in relational organizing, well, you're 8.3 percentage times more likely to get out and vote if you receive a message from a friend. 8.3 percentage points, that's pretty high. The increase in likelihood to opt into an organizing event is about 8 times higher, and even signing a petition is 6.5 times. And this is what studies have proven. Now, one of the things that we do, we study a lot and watch what the Democrats are doing. And I tell you, sometimes I feel like throwing up my hands, because they are teaching relational organizing at their conventions. They're holding trainings. They are teaching union members. It's really penetrated through many organizations and campaigns. And in fact, a few years ago, I can't remember the number, but it was like the DCCC. They were investing like, what was the number? $20,000 or $200,000 a month in tools for relational organizers. The number is really high, but those are the reasons why I think very quickly why we need to do this. Our tool, you can see just, friend-to-friend messaging, creating messages, sharing it with people that are in the audience and people that and sharing it to other friends. And just a very quick story for a point of reference. We were involved in the Eric Odland campaign in Colorado 7 last year, and he had a pretty robust team, and we were able to identify almost 3,000 new voters that he didn't know about, the campaign didn't know about, that weren't on the voter rolls, from friends messaging friends. That's a big number when you start talking about a Congress race. 3,000 people that they didn't even know about. Social sharing, neighborhood, and this is digital canvassing. It's not door to door. There's a lot of good apps for door knocking. This is more for digital canvassing and, of course, reporting. So that's about it. I am really happy everybody could join me today and join David, because I think it was well worth our time. Was there one more question I see? How can we set up Swipe Red, non-Republican branded team? Tasha, I'll give you a call. We can talk about that. And Ron, where can you find it? You can look on our website at buzz360.co, C-O, not com, buzz360.co. And no, the Swipe Red app is not free. So if that's any other questions, I'm happy to take any questions. And if David is still on, I'm sure he would answer one more question before we end today. Gina, go out to our website, buzz360.co, and you can set pricing, and I can give you a call. Yes, I can give you David's contact information after we get off, Carrie. Very good. Thank you, everyone. I'm really happy that you all got on today. I think this has been very valuable. It's an area that I think oftentimes many of us neglect because we don't think young people vote, and that just isn't true anymore. So thank you very much. David, it was great talking to you. It was great seeing you, even though it was online. Thank you.